When 5 people were found lifeless in an England farmhouse, it was pretty obvious who did it. Sometimes that happens and cases are solved in the snap of a finger. But this case started to seem a little too obvious to be true. In the wee hours of August 7th, 1985, 24-year-old Jeremy Bamber called his local police station in Chelmsford, England. He reported a concerning phone call from his dad, who apparently told him, "Your sister's gone crazy and she's got a gun." Shortly after that, Jeremy said he heard a bullet ring out and the line went dead. Jeremy told the police that he was concerned for his father and asked for officers to go check out things at his parents' farmhouse, which is often called the White House Farm. Shortly after that, 3 officers drove over and Jeremy met them there. Oh, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on this cake. So it's pretty simple. All your dry ingredients you're gonna throw in the bowl and go ahead and give that a good mix. The police stood outside and waited for a tactical firearms unit to arrive. They didn't know if Jeremy's sister Sheila was still inside. And based on what Jeremy said, she was armed and dangerous, which is why they called for backup. By 5 a.m., the whole crew had assembled, but they decided to wait until the sun came up to enter the house. Officers walked the perimeter and determined that all the windows and doors were closed except for one window in the main bedroom on the ground floor. They spoke to Sheila over a megaphone, but after 2 hours with no response, the police decided it was time to break in. At 7:54 in the morning, authorities took a sledgehammer to the back door and entered the White House farm. Upon first entry, they were greeted by a body on the floor and knew that this wasn't going to be a fun case. First up was 61-year-old Neville Bamber, aka Jeremy's dad. He was lying over an upside-down chair in the kitchen wearing his pajamas. There were 8 bullet wounds on his body, a bunch of bruises and lacerations. It was clear that he was attacked by someone strong. And based on the bullet casings, officials theorized that Neville was the first fired at upstairs, but fought back and managed to make it to the kitchen to try and call for help. Sadly though, he was hit by another bullet when it knocked him out completely. Next up was 61-year-old June, aka Neville's wife and Jeremy's mom. June was discovered on the floor of the master bedroom, wearing pajamas that were soaked in red fluid. Just like Neville, June was covered in bullet wounds and other injuries. She was hit with 7 bullets in total, including one that went right between her eyes. Lying on the floor in the same room, officers found 28-year-old Sheila Caffel, aka Jeremy's older sister. The one he said had a firearm and was going crazy. Sheila was hit with bullets, one in the chin and one in the throat. The .22 rifle was laying on her body, pointing straight up at her neck. And June's Bible was on the floor next to her. The last 2 corpses were of Daniel and Nicholas Caffel, also known as Sheila's 6-year-old twin sons. And Daniel still had his thumb in his mouth. It looked like someone had pulled the trigger on them at a super close range while they were still in bed. Gosh, I really hope that they were asleep when this happened. Okay, so once you have mixed your dry ingredients, go ahead and add your wet ingredients. All right, and you're just gonna mix that together. When police officers delivered the heartbreaking news to Jeremy, he broke down crying and even vomited. I mean, what a tragic day for him. I can't even imagine what that must be like to lose your entire family just like that. With the story that Jeremy gave to the police and the way things looked at the crime scene, it seemed like Sheila executed her family members and then turned the rifle on herself. She had a long history of mental illness and was even hospitalized for schizophrenia 5 months earlier. Sheila's doctor told the detectives that Sheila believed that the devil had given her the power to project evil onto others and, gosh, I don't even want to say this, but that she could make her sons have intercourse with her. I'm sorry. I hate it just as much as you do. Medical examiners ran some tests on Sheila where they found haloperidol and cannabis in her system. If you don't know what haloperidol is, it's a prescription medicine used to treat mental illness. So it was all adding up. Sheila was a mentally unstable, substance-using divorcee who got a hold of a rifle and did the unthinkable. The police were so certain that this was the case that they didn't even want to close off the crime scene and conduct as thorough of an investigation as they could have. For starters, the evidence wasn't properly handled, logged, or preserved. During the initial research, one of the officers had moved the rifle without wearing gloves, and it wasn't even dusted for fingerprints until weeks after. Days after the incident, the police had already burned sheets and rugs from the farmhouse that were coated in fluid. And by that point, authorities had already given the house keys back to Jeremy and his extended family. They also didn't write any notes about the crime scene investigation until weeks later. Soon enough, the story of the White House Farm executions hit the cover page of the newspapers everywhere, and people were shook. Why and how would a woman ever be able to slay her own kids and parents? But even though the police and the media ran with the story, a few of Jeremy's cousins didn't believe it. One of the cousins went to the farmhouse on August 10th and found a firearm silencer in the cupboard. It was covered with vital fluid and a bit of paint. The cousin took the silencer to another one of Jeremy's cousins, who agreed that it seemed very suspicious. Sometime around then, Jeremy's relatives went to the chief inspector's office and asked him if he could consider Jeremy as a suspect. He was appalled and literally kicked them out. Over time, though, it started to seem more and more likely that Jeremy did it instead of Sheila. Days after the cousins reported finding the silencer, the police picked it up. They ran some testing and they concluded that the red splatters were from Sheila. But based on her injuries, there was no way that she could have put the silencer in the cupboard after pulling the trigger on herself. And if the silencer was on the weapon, it would have been too long for Sheila to be able to successfully give herself the wounds that she had. She also didn't have any firearm residue or oil on her clothing, and her hands and feet were completely clean. This matters because if she was the one who committed the crime, she would have definitely had lubricant or lead residue on her hands from loading the magazine. All right, now that I've stirred this up a little bit, we're gonna bring out the big guns and grab our mixer. The downstairs area where Neville was finished off had a broken sugar container, so the floor was covered in sugar and vital fluid. Since Sheila was barefoot, her feet would have been dirty if she was guilty. But they were squeaky clean. On August 16th, a funeral was held for Sheila, Neville, and June. In the news footage captured at the event, Jeremy seemed super heartbroken and sad. But Sheila's ex-husband, Colin, said that the moment that the cameras stopped rolling, Jeremy's whole attitude shifted. Jeremy started laughing, cracking jokes, and making really inappropriate comments about his girlfriend. Colin said Jeremy couldn't wait to get back to the house with Julie and have some fun. Julie was Jeremy's girlfriend, and let me tell you, I have some tea from her. So Julie was very supportive of Jeremy in the beginning. She maintained his innocence in her interview with the police and stood by his side at the funeral. But in mid-August, Julie and Jeremy were fighting more than ever, and Jeremy revealed that he'd been cheating. By the beginning of September, things got so bad, the couple broke up, which is when the truth about the slayings were revealed. I think this looks really good, and I think we should put them in here. All right, and we're gonna scoop these into our little pan. On September 7th, Julie went to the police station to say that she had lied in her initial interview. She told them that Jeremy had been talking about wanting to execute his parents for the past year. And what, she didn't think to report it back then? Apparently, Jeremy was always ranting about his parents and how they were trying to ruin his life, how his sister had nothing to live for, and her twins were disturbed. He was super mad that his parents were paying for Sheila's flat too. I mean, how dare your parents help their own child? Julie told the cops that Jeremy toyed around with the idea of sneaking into the farmhouse through the kitchen window, slipping his parents a sleeping pill, firing at them with a weapon, and then setting the house on fire. He thought Sheila would be the perfect scapegoat, and allegedly said that he'd make a call from the White House farm to his house just to back the story up even more. After that, he'd cash in on the 400,000 pounds of family money. So, pretty much everything Julie told the police about Jeremy's plans was true, aside from the part of him setting the house on fire. On the night of the crime, Julie said that Jeremy called her to say that he'd been thinking about his plan, saying that it was tonight or never. Much later, he called her back and told her, "Everything is going well, something is wrong at the farm, I haven't had any sleep all night, bye honey, and I love you lots." As worried as Jeremy sounded, Julie was super tired because it was like 3 a.m. and she didn't ask Jeremy what was wrong. Later that morning, Jeremy called Julie again, claiming Sheila went psycho. When Julie went to go see Jeremy, he pulled her aside and said, "I should have been an actor." Julie said that she asked Jeremy if he executed the cops, and he said no, but was like, "I paid my buddy 2,000 pounds to do it." And after hearing that confession and enduring several fights with Jeremy, Julie decided it was time to rat him out to the police. Once Julie spilled all this, officers arrested Jeremy and the friend that he supposedly hired. The friend ended up having a rock-solid alibi, so he was released from jail, making Jeremy look like he was much more guilty. He probably just made up the hitman thing so that he didn't have to tell Julie that he was the one that committed the crime firsthand. The detectives had a hard time going back and linking Jeremy to the crime, which is primarily because they didn't conduct a thorough enough investigation and had already contaminated and destroyed a bunch of evidence. Love that. At this point, they didn't have enough proof to charge him for the slayings, so they clocked him on some robbery charges from March while continuing to look for something more incriminating. Jeremy made bail for those charges, and by September 13th, he was out of jail. From there, he went on a vacation to Saint-Tropez. He also went to the Sun newspaper and tried to sell topless photos of Sheila, his deceased sister. The Sun didn't go through with it, but they did publish a story about how strange and disturbing that was of Jeremy. Okay, this is my last scoop, and I'm going to go ahead and pop this into the oven. By the end of September, Jeremy made it back from his little vacay, and the cops were ready to put him in cuffs. This time, they charged him for the executions. The police found Jeremy's prints on the rifle, and they were able to determine for certain that the silencer had to be used that night. That's because 25 bullets were discharged and the neighbors didn't report hearing anything. And if that was the case, Sheila definitely didn't commit the crime because, as I mentioned earlier, she wouldn't have been able to use the weapon on herself with the added length of the silencer. In addition, there were some scratch marks on the red mantelpiece that matched up with marks on the silencer. This finding led investigators to believe a struggle for the rifle ensued, which again didn't match up with the Sheila did it theory. Another sketchy thing about Jeremy is that he didn't call the emergency 999 line early that morning to report the possible crime. Instead, he called the police station. And that's when detectives were like, wait, why didn't Neville just dial 999 instead of calling his son? Jeremy said that his dad called him instead of calling the police because he wanted to keep things in the family. He claimed that he called the station because he didn't think it would make a difference in the response time. Bro, if there's a line dedicated to emergencies, it's safe to assume that it's gonna be faster than the regular office phone. All right, we're gonna go ahead and put these on a plate and then dress them. Jeremy's trial began on October 14th with his ex-girlfriend, Julie, as the star witness. She told the jury all about Jeremy's shady plan and their remarks, and even that he tested his courage by strangling some rats before committing the crime. He did what? When it was time for the defense to present their case, they accused Julie of lying because she was mad that Jeremy cheated on her. I get the whole revenge thing, but something tells me that this girl wouldn't jump through all these hoops just to get back at him. He seems guilty to me. Jeremy was pretty confident that he would be found innocent, but much to his dismay, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. He was punished with all 5 life sentences and recommended to stay in jail without the opportunity for parole until at least 25 years in. The judge who made the announcement said, "I find it difficult to foresee whether it ever be safe to release someone who can shoot 2 little boys as they lie asleep in their beds." He also said that Jeremy was warped and evil beyond belief. But as certain as the jury was, this verdict had been criticized for years due to a lack of forensic evidence. And while most people, including me, believe Jeremy is guilty, some feel uneasy with the sentencing because there's not enough proof that he did it. And of course, that wouldn't be the problem if the detectives had saved and logged all the evidence. In my eyes, there is still more proof to back up the Jeremy theory over any of the others. And he seems to have a pretty solid motive too. Okay, now we're gonna add our icing. All right, so let's get into it. Neville and June Bamber weren't able to have any children of their own, so they decided to adopt, which meant Sheila and Jeremy were both adopted. Sheila came first in 1957. She was born to a chaplain's daughter, who was forced to give her up. Jeremy was born in 1961. He was also conceived by a religious official's daughter, who had an affair with a married army sergeant. As a baby, Jeremy was put up for adoption, and the Bambers happily took him in. Both kids were well taken care of financially, but June was known for being very strict and religious with her kids. Jeremy also received a lot of pressure to take after his father in farming, an industry where Jeremy absolutely despised. All right, done with that. Okay, now we're gonna top it off with some raspberry jelly. He pursued a bunch of different jobs, from smuggling substances to working in restaurants, but he eventually agreed to work for his father, live on one of his properties rent-free, and drive an extra car that belonged to his family. Wait, that sounds like a dream. Why was Jeremy mad about that? Well, Jeremy resented his parents for being so hard on him and sending him to boarding school, where he was physically violated at 11 years old. In addition, his dad was gonna cut him off if he didn't work for his company. Since Jeremy hated the job and his parents so much, it only made sense for him to snuff them and take their money. Okay, time for the powdered sugar. According to a friend, Jeremy wanted to buy a Ferrari or Porsche and put the farm on the market as soon as possible and live as a playboy in London. Since his sister had gone crazy, he knew that she was the perfect person to frame for the crime. All right, Now that you know all the case details, do you agree with me that Jeremy's guilty? Let me know your thoughts on this case and this cake in the comments below. I'm pretty proud of myself for making this. See you next time.